It started with the kind of silence that made your skin crawl, the kind that hangs in the air just before a storm, thick and electric. Inside Miller's Diner on Route 17, the morning hum of clinking coffee cups and quiet conversation was suddenly shattered when a towering biker in a grease-stained leather vest stood up, his chair screeching across the tile like nails on a chalkboard. All eyes turned toward the center booth where an 85-year-old man named Walter sat quietly, eating scrambled eggs and sipping black coffee. Walter was a regular, polite, kind, always tipping well, and always wearing his faded army cap with the 1st Infantry Division patch. The biker, drunk on ego more than alcohol, swaggered over with clenched fists and spit venom, accusing Walter of staring at his girl, who sat smirking near the window. Walter raised his eyes, calm and unimpressed, and simply said, "Son, you should sit back down before you make a mistake you can't take back." That was it. The biker snarled and, without warning, punched Walter square in the jaw. The crack echoed through the diner like a gunshot. Chairs scraped back, dishes crashed. An old man's body slumped to the floor, blood on his lip, his cap rolling across the linoleum like a fallen flag. For a second, nobody moved. Then a waitress screamed. Someone shouted for the police. But then something even more chilling happened. Walter didn't groan. He didn't moan. He reached into his pocket with trembling hands and pulled out an old flip phone, the kind most folks hadn't seen in years. With slow fingers, he pressed just one button, and then he closed it. The biker laughed and spat on the floor. "What's that, old man? Calling your bingo buddies?" But Walter just stared at him with eyes that had seen Normandy, Korea, and a dozen things this thug could never imagine. 20 minutes later, the sky began to shake. Not thunder, not helicopters. It was something heavier, more deliberate. People ran to the diner windows as a convoy of matte black armored vehicles rolled down the highway, turning with military precision into the parking lot. Out of the lead vehicle stepped a man in desert camo, muscles tense, jaw locked, eyes burning, like fire beneath a tactical helmet. It was Captain Daniel Price, Walter's son, and behind him a military strike team fanned out across the pavement, surrounding the diner with practiced ease. The biker's grin disappeared. So did his friends. Daniel didn't say a word as he walked through the shattered door, past the tipped-over chairs and spilled coffee, straight to his father, who by now had propped himself up with dignity. Daniel helped him to his feet, looked him over, then turned to the biker who looked like he wanted to vanish into the floor. "You hit my father?" Daniel asked, voice calm, cold and sharp like a knife wrapped in silk. The biker stuttered, raising his hands. It was a joke, man. I didn't know." Daniel nodded, then stepped aside. 2 soldiers grabbed the biker and pinned him to the wall like he weighed nothing. "You just punched the wrong history," Daniel said. And with that, chapter 1 of the longest day Miller's Diner would ever see began. The silence that followed was the kind of silence that never truly felt empty. It was heavy, like the calm between lightning strikes, a silence that carried weight because everyone inside Miller's Diner knew that what came next wasn't just retaliation. It was justice wrapped in uniform, discipline, and decades of restrained fury. As Captain Daniel Price stood with his boots planted firmly where his father had bled, staring down a man who didn't understand yet that he hadn't just swung his fist at an old man, he'd struck a legacy, a battlefield, a flag stitched into the heart of a family that had served this country through generations. And as 2 soldiers pinned the biker against the wall, his cocky grin was long gone, replaced now with the cold sweat of realization while Daniel calmly looked around the room, meeting the eyes of every witness, every patron who now clutched their coffee cups like lifelines. And then he spoke, not loud, not dramatic, but with the weight of authority that made even the ceiling fans seem to quiet. "My father doesn't need revenge," he said, glancing at Walter, who stood tall again despite the blood at his lip and the bruise forming on his cheek, "because he raised me to handle that burden." And with a nod, his men secured the biker with plastic restraints and marched him outside where the convoy waited with open doors and running engines. But this wasn't over. Not yet. Because as Daniel turned back to the room, he saw something that made his jaw tighten even more. On the floor beside a broken ketchup bottle was a crumpled flyer from a local biker rally, and in the lower corner was a small emblem. A skull wrapped in barbed wire, the insignia of a gang known for trafficking stolen weapons across state lines. And suddenly, this wasn't just about an assault in a diner. It was about something bigger, and Walter saw that look in his son's eyes and said, low but steady, "You always knew it was never just one man," to which Daniel replied, "And you always knew how to pick your battles." And together, they stepped outside into the sunlight where townsfolk were already gathering at the edge of the lot, filming on their phones and whispering among themselves. But Daniel didn't pause for cameras or questions. He approached the soldier nearest the convoy and said, "I want every face from that flyer identified, every known associate, and a full sweep on this gang's activity across county lines. We don't stop until we know why one of them was here today." And while orders were being shouted and data relays launched from a mobile command post, Walter sat quietly on the tailgate of one of the vehicles, sipping the same black coffee someone had brought out from the diner. And for a moment the years seemed to fall off his shoulders as he watched his son take command of the chaos with a calm honed from both blood and discipline. But just as things began to stabilize, a sudden screech of tires broke the air. Another biker, younger but clearly connected, came flying into the parking lot on a Harley, skidding sideways before jumping off with panic in his voice, shouting, "You can't do this, that man in there, he's not who you think he is." And Daniel turned slowly, lifting one hand to halt his men before approaching, eyes narrowed. "Who sent you?" he asked. But the young rider shook his head, panting. It wasn't supposed to go down like this. He wasn't supposed to touch the old man. He was just supposed to make a scene. And Daniel's voice dropped into something darker. "Who gave that order?" But before the biker could answer, a gunshot cracked through the air, ripping through the silence from somewhere across the highway. And Daniel tackled the biker to the ground as his men spread out instantly, securing Walter behind a vehicle, weapons raised, eyes scanning the tree line. "Sniper!" someone shouted. "North Ridge!" And now the town that had been so quiet moments ago was under siege. And as Walter crouched behind cover, he looked to his son, whose back was against the wheel well beside him, and said with a slow, grim smile, "Well, you sure know how to make an entrance." To which Daniel simply loaded his sidearm and replied, "You always said I had your timing." And with that, the strike team moved, their formation flawless, returning fire toward the sniper's position, while the young biker was dragged to cover and interrogated further, spilling what he knew as bullets cracked above their heads, naming names, revealing that this attack was just a distraction for something worse. A shipment, a deal, something moving through this very highway today disguised as a farming truck. And Daniel's mind raced as he radioed in for a highway lockdown, air surveillance and backup reinforcements, while Walter kept his eyes trained on the ridge, tracking the sniper's angle with a precision no 85-year-old should have had, whispering, "2 more inches and that shot would have been through your shoulder." To which Daniel gave a grim nod. "And 2 inches more means I owe you another Father's Day gift." But the humor vanished quickly as the sniper was finally neutralized, and the confirmation came in that the farming truck had just passed mile marker 49, meaning they had 10 minutes, maybe less, before it hit the town's main fuel depot. And Daniel barked into the radio, "We're not letting this town become someone's warning shot. This ends now." And the engines roared. Again as the strike team remounted with Daniel and Walter side by side in the lead vehicle, heading toward the horizon, because this wasn't just retaliation anymore. This was a mission. The military Humvee tore down Route 17 with urgency that matched the thunder in the sky above as Captain Daniel Price gripped the dash with one hand and a comms radio in the other, barking orders while his father Walter rode beside him, jaw set like the stone of Arlington. Neither man speaking now because there wasn't time. Just behind them, 2 more armored trucks followed, their tires chewing pavement, their turrets manned, all eyes hunting for the disguised farming truck that the young biker had warned about. A vehicle carrying far more than produce, now only minutes from the center of town where the main fuel depot stood like a powder keg waiting for a spark. And inside the Humvee, the tension was alive like static, buzzing through the radios as one voice confirmed, "Target approaching marker 51, Confirmed eastbound, minimal escort, possible armed driver. And Daniel leaned forward, catching sight of a large, dirt-covered flatbed weaving down the highway, bales of hay stacked high but poorly secured, and underneath, barely visible, the glint of steel crates half covered in canvas, military-grade weapons, likely stolen, possibly rigged, and... His voice dropped to a growl as he said, "Target acquired. Intercept in 30 seconds. Lockdown perimeter. Nobody in or out." And just as the convoy approached, the farming truck suddenly jerked left, tires screeching as it swerved off the road trying to cut through a wheat field toward the tree line. But Daniel was already ahead of it, slamming his fist on the dash and shouting, "Flank right, cut them off at the ridge. Strike Team Alpha on me." And the lead vehicle peeled into the field, dirt and stalks flying, bouncing across the uneven terrain as soldiers gripped their weapons and braced, and Walter, ever steady, leaned out the window with binoculars, scanning ahead and calling, "3. Men in the cab, 2 more in the trailer. One of them's got a launcher." And Daniel nodded without turning. "Then we stop them here or that town burns." And with that, the rear door burst open and soldiers deployed like clockwork, boots pounding earth, moving in formation toward the truck that was now stuck in the soft mud, wheels spinning, men jumping out armed to the teeth, one of them firing a warning shot toward the convoy but missing wide. And then chaos erupted. Short bursts of gunfire echoed through the field as Daniel and his team returned fire with calculated precision, taking cover behind bales, using terrain like veterans do, every movement clean, professional, lethal, while Walter, still inside the vehicle, calmly clicked off the safety on a sidearm he'd been given, eyes never leaving the field. And when one of the assailants broke off from the truck and began sprinting toward a nearby farmhouse, Walter opened the door, stepped down with more steel in his spine than most men half his age, and took aim, firing once, hitting the man in the leg with the kind of accuracy that made even the nearest soldier turn in shock. And one young private muttered, "That old man just saved my flank." But there was no time for praise because Daniel had reached the trailer now, shouting for surrender, his voice cutting through the smoke. And the last remaining gunman finally dropped his weapon, hands shaking. "You don't understand," he cried. "We're just a distraction. The real shipment's not here. It's already en route to the depot with decoys everywhere." And Daniel froze, heart thudding as the weight of those words sank in, and he turned back to his team, shouting, "This was a diversion. Everyone back to vehicles. Rendezvous at town center, full lockdown now." And engines roared to life again as troops remounted, mud flying, sirens wailing, and Walter climbed in beside his son once more, out of breath, but burning with the same fire Daniel carried. And the old man said, "So they wanted you chasing shadows." To which Daniel replied, "And now they've given me the light." And the convoy sped back down the highway, radios crackling with reports of multiple unmarked vans heading toward the town from all directions. No plates, no tags, just black windows and disguised death. And Daniel's voice thundered over the line, "This is not a drill. This is a coordinated infiltration. Set up checkpoints at all intersections. Roadblocks on Route 14 and Main. Deploy aerial drones with thermal." And as the town came into view again, a deep dread settled over every man and woman in uniform because they weren't just defending a fuel depot anymore. They were protecting a town, families, history, and Walter knew it too, clenching his fists as he whispered, "They think they're coming to take something, but they don't know what's waiting for them." And as the first van appeared on the horizon, speeding toward Main Street like a missile on wheels, Daniel gave the command, "Hold your fire until my mark." Because what came next wasn't about firepower. It was about precision, timing, and a line no enemy would cross without facing the kind of retaliation that leaves scars, not just on bodies but on memory. And in that moment, under the blazing midday sun, as townsfolk peeked out their windows and soldiers took their positions, the town wasn't just a dot on a map, it became a battlefield. And every soldier there knew that what happened in the next 5 minutes would decide whether peace returned or history was written in ashes. The town square was quiet, too quiet, as the first of the unmarked vans barreled down Main Street like a charging bull, its black windows glinting under the afternoon sun while every soldier crouched behind barricades, their fingers tight on triggers, eyes trained on the incoming threat, and Daniel, standing firm in the center like a human anchor, raised his hand to hold fire, waiting, calculating, reading the movement like a battlefield chessboard, while Walter, seated just steps behind him under the shade of a war memorial, whispered to himself, "Let them come." And just as the van crossed the last red brick line near Town Hall, Daniel dropped his hand and yelled, "Now!" And the entire street erupted into organized chaos. Spike strips snapped up from the pavement, tires exploded in black rubber clouds, smoke canisters launched from rooftops, and soldiers moved in flawless rhythm, swarming the immobilized vehicle with doors ripped open before the attackers could even grab their weapons. But it wasn't just one van, not even two, as four more came into view from different directions, one trying to plow through a side alley, another reversing toward the back of the elementary school, and Daniel's comms lit up with voices. Hostiles on the west corner. Third van attempting breach at fuel depot perimeter. Sniper on roof near the post office. And everything became a storm of sound, urgency, and action as the strike teams split with precision, fanning across the town like a living shield, their movements protecting citizens who were being rushed into basements, behind shelters, under counters, while Walter, despite his bruised jaw and scuffed knees, grabbed a fallen sidearm from an injured soldier and limped toward the comms truck, barking into the headset like the commander he once was, coordinating blockades, warning of rooftops, and issuing clear, calm updates that reminded everyone why the veterans were never just old men. They were the spine of a nation's memory, and the battle dragged on for 17 straight minutes. Shots echoing down side streets, flashbangs turning day into momentary blindness, bodies diving behind cover, but not one soldier fell without being pulled back. Not 1 inch of ground was surrendered, and when the final van crashed into the library steps and 3 attackers burst out screaming, one of them holding what looked like a detonator, Daniel sprinted through the open square, dodging bullets that whizzed by his shoulder, and tackled the man to the ground, disarming him with a knee to the ribs and a twist that snapped bone, while 2 more were subdued by Walter's pointed callouts from behind the command post. "Right flank, behind the green truck, he's reloading." And when silence finally fell, when the smoke cleared and the last cuffs were snapped on the last wrist, there was a moment where the town seemed to breathe again, where the birds returned to the sky and neighbors began emerging from hiding. And Daniel walked toward Walter with grime on his face, blood on his sleeve, and victory in his tired eyes, kneeling before his father with a look that said, "We did it." And Walter, straightening up as best he could, handed the sidearm back and said, "You always were late to breakfast." And they both chuckled. Just 2 warriors, generations apart, standing in the same sun that had watched over everything they'd fought for, while the townspeople slowly gathered, offering water, blankets, and shaky thanks, and news crews began arriving, but Daniel waved them off, saying, "Let the story be about the people who stopped it, not the ones who started it." And somewhere in the back of the diner, the biker, now cuffed and bruised, sat slumped against a wall, eyes wide with disbelief, as he finally understood that the man he'd punched wasn't just an old veteran in a cap, but the heartbeat of a legacy he could never destroy. And as military vehicles pulled away, soldiers loaded the weapons cache, and helicopters circled overhead for any remaining threats, Walter looked toward the flag atop Town Hall, fluttering proud and untouched, and whispered with a steady voice, "They thought they were coming for a soft target, but this town still remembers how to stand." And the screen faded to black, not with gunfire, not with glory, but with the quiet resolve of a town and a family that knew when peace was worth fighting for.